A system created by the most educated minds of its time forced thousands of people to confess to acts that their own doctrine deemed physically impossible. On one side were theologians and lawyers, masters of logic and dogma. On the other were accusations of flying on broomsticks and making deals with the devil, claims that official church doctrine often dismissed as superstition. How did the most enlightened minds create the most irrational assembly line of death? This wasn't a witch hunt in the traditional sense. It was a perfectly calibrated system of psychological annihilation, where the primary instrument was not iron, but words. The book, The Hammer of Witches, published in 1487, became a European bestseller, second only to the Bible in copies printed over the next 200 years. But this is no mere collection of superstitions. It is history's first manual on applied psychological manipulation. And in 4 minutes we will expose the first, most brutal physiological trick of this system, which turned a natural bodily reaction into proof of guilt. The system operated counterintuitively, which raises two questions that defy common sense. First, why did the most devout and pious women, whose faith was unshakable, often confess to a pact with the devil most quickly, while skeptics resisted the longest? The answer to this question will be revealed in Section 4. And the second, more critical question, what explains the fact that over 80% of all witch trials were based solely on confessions, secured with a complete lack of physical evidence, witnesses, or any real consequences of witchcraft? Over 80%. That's 4 out of every 5 death sentences issued on the basis of words extracted from the accused. We will dissect the mechanism of this conveyor belt in Section 6. The answers to these questions will change your understanding of the psychology of persuasion. This video is not about history. It is about 6 timeless mechanisms of psychological manipulation that are actively used today. By the end of this video, you will be handed the Inquisitor's own manual. The goal is not just to learn about the past, but to learn how to recognize these 6 timeless mechanisms in modern political debates, aggressive marketing, abusive relationships, and cult recruitment. After watching, you will see these manipulations everywhere. This is a transformation from mere knowledge to a tool for defending your own mind. The hammer of witches worked like a sieve. Its purpose was not to find witches among the masses, but to sift any person through it until only guilt remained. We will analyze not what you think you know about the Inquisition, but what you don't, the psychological technologies that are still at work today. Here is the map of our journey. It marks 3 key points of exposure. In 4 minutes, we will expose the first and most fundamental tool: how creating a total vacuum around a person becomes the first step toward controlling their mind. In 10 minutes, you will learn about a diabolically clever linguistic trap, a question impossible to answer correctly, and why it is still used to prove a predetermined conclusion of guilt. And in 18 minutes, we will reach the climax and see how the system forces victims to accuse one another, launching a self-sustaining conveyor belt of terror that requires no real evidence. We will break down the 3 key stages of this psychological annihilation. The first step on this map is the most physiological. It will show how to break the body to gain access to the mind. 40 hours without sleep. The procedure was called the trial of tears and was not considered torture. It was a legally sanctioned test that turned physiology into proof of guilt. The logic was diabolically simple. A physical reaction was used to prove a spiritual crime. In the 17th century, confession became the queen of evidence, and any method that led to it was deemed lawful. The trial of tears was one such method. Here is the detail that sealed the trap. Being awake for over 40 hours physiologically blocks the function of the tear ducts. The inability to cry, a natural reaction of an exhausted body, was interpreted as a sign of diabolical dryness, a lack of remorse. The body was chilled by isolation, and then the pressure of interrogation forced it to harden into the shape of a confession. The inability to cry was the freezing point, after which the structure of the personality shattered. Physiology became a weapon. But the next weapon was forged from silence. What is more terrifying, the screams from a torture chamber or the absolute silence of a stone cell? The inquisitors knew the answer. Complete isolation was a mandatory first step. The victim spent the initial hours in cold, darkness, and silence, interrupted only by the sound of their own heart. A brain deprived of external stimuli begins to attack itself. Fear and guilt are amplified manifold. Modern studies on sensory deprivation show that after 48 hours of such isolation, the brain begins to generate hallucinations. The line between reality and imagination blurs. It was at this precise moment that the inquisitor entered the cell. His voice became the only external stimulus, the only source of order in the chaos. This emptiness was not a side effect of confinement, but its primary tool. And into this void, the first logical trap was cast. The interrogation manual, written in the 15th century, remains relevant for understanding techniques of cognitive control. At first glance, the similarities to modern methods are obvious: isolation and deprivation to pressure an individual. But the inquisitors intuitively discovered and systemized what is now known as pattern breaking and learned helplessness. This is not mere pressure, it is targeted reprogramming. And here is the key difference. The goal of modern techniques is often to obtain information. The goal of the inquisitor was the transformation of personality. He didn't want to know what the victim did. He wanted to make her believe she was a witch. For over 300 years, the methods of the hammer of witches remained the standard for interrogation, surviving the Renaissance and the dawn of the Enlightenment. Back then, it was called cleansing the soul. Today, it's called cognitive reprogramming. The essence has not changed. An inquisitor, knowing the accused's name, would never begin the interrogation immediately. Why were days, sometimes weeks, of preliminary confinement necessary? The superficial answer is to weaken the victim. The true purpose was deeper: the complete erasure of her baseline reality. Isolation cut her off from her familiar world, her social roles, and the affirmation of her innocence from loved ones. A vacuum was created that only one person could fill. The inquisitor waited for the moment when the victim was so starved for human contact that she would cling to any structure offered to her, even if that structure was self-incrimination. Two factors made this preparation lethal: time and silence. The body was isolated, the mind weakened. The stage was perfectly set for the next weapon, one that leaves no bruises but destroys the very ability to defend oneself. Answer yes or no. Have you stopped consorting with the devil? Any answer is a confession. Yes means you did it in the past. No means you continue to do it. This is the second element in the inquisitor's arsenal, the loaded question. Its mechanism is presupposition, where the phrasing of the question itself contains an assertion of guilt. This was not a random trick. It was a technology, systematized and recommended in the Hammer of Witches. Its authors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, were not just monks, but doctors of theology with official authority from the Pope. Their method was designed not to find information, but to construct guilt. It destroyed the very possibility of a rational defense. This technique is timeless. A politician asks an opponent, "When will you stop ignoring the needs of your constituents?" A journalist attacks, "Why does your company continue to hide the truth?" Studies of modern political debates show that a typical 30-minute argument can feature up to 15 or 20 logical fallacies. The loaded question is one of the most common. Its goal is not to get an answer, but to force the opponent onto the defensive, compelling them to challenge the frame of the question itself. While they are busy doing that, the accusation has already been made and has taken root in the audience's mind. Now it's your turn. You have 5 seconds. Find the 2 logical traps in this inquisitor's question. Why do you continue to deny the obvious facts that others have already confirmed? The first trap is the presupposition of action. The phrase, "continue to deny," asserts that you have denied it before. The second trap is the presupposition of proof. The phrases, "obvious facts" and "confirmed by others" present unproven rumors as established truth and create the pressure of a social majority. Resisting such a construct is nearly impossible. It is designed to paralyze logic and induce feelings of guilt and isolation. Logic is cornered. Every word is turned against you. The mind, unable to defend itself, becomes vulnerable. Now that the victim is disoriented and intellectually disarmed, the Inquisitor proceeds to the most terrifying step. He begins to erase her identity and rewrite her memories. He will construct a past that never existed. It is here that the system provides the answer to our first question. Why did the most devout women break the fastest? Because the Inquisitor turned their greatest virtue, their faith, into a weapon against them. This is the third tool in the arsenal, gaslighting and the erasure of reality. A representative of God on earth would look a believer in the eyes and say, "I see evil in you, therefore it is there, even if you don't remember it." This created an unbearable cognitive dissonance. How could a pious Christian be a witch? The only way out was to believe the devil had possessed her so deeply that he had erased the memory of her sin. Her own sense of guilt filled this logical void. The victim's faith was fertile soil. The Inquisitor planted a seed of doubt. Her innate sense of guilt became the water that nourished this seed until it grew into a full-fledged false memory. And only then did the system offer her the illusion of salvation. The term gaslighting only appeared in the 20th century, following the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband systematically drives his wife insane by denying her reality. But the Hammer of Witches, written 457 years earlier, already contained a step-by-step guide. A quote, "If the accused stubbornly denies, point out to her that the devil has clouded her mind to hide her sins." This was not an intuitive trick. It was a codified technology, and it explains why 80% of trials were built exclusively on confessions. This was the main engine of the conveyor belt. The authors of The Hammer of Witches went even further. They explicitly recommended lying to the accused, promising them a pardon in exchange for a confession, and then breaking that promise. Have you ever been told that never happened when you knew for a fact that it did? Interrogation transcripts show this transformation in real time. At first, there is confident denial. The accused appeals to her reputation, her faith, and her witnesses. Her answers are clear and logical. But after several days of isolation, the trial of tears, and loaded questions, a turning point appears in the records. Phrases change from "I did not do this" to "I do not remember doing this." This tiny shift in wording is a signal that reality is cracked. And what is shocking is that after this break, the victim doesn't just passively agree. She begins to take the initiative, recalling the names of other witches and describing details of the Sabbath, becoming a co-author of her own guilt. In the interrogation records of Agnes Sampson from 1590, her voice is first described as loud and furious, and after she breaks, as quiet and contrite. The victim is broken and has confessed to everything. But the Inquisitor then makes her an offer she cannot refuse. The ultimate goal of gaslighting was not just a confession for the record. The goal was a complete rewriting of the personality. The Inquisitors saw their mission as saving the soul, and for that, the victim had to genuinely believe in her own guilt. She had to die not as an innocent Christian, but as a repentant witch. This is why interrogations often continued for weeks and months after a confession was obtained. The Inquisitor forced her to retell her new memories over and over, adding details, cementing the new identity. This was the final act of erasure. Reality was destroyed. Memory was rewritten. Now the system was ready to offer her the illusion of a choice that was, in fact, no choice at all. This choice was not between life and death. It was a choice between two kinds of hell. Option A. Unbearable torture that could last for weeks only to end in death at the stake as an unrepentant witch. Option B, an end to the torture, a confession, a quick death, often by merciful strangulation before being burned, and a chance at salvation for her soul. This is the fourth tool, the false dilemma, and here is the detail that explains everything. This choice was presented as an act of mercy. The Inquisitor, sincerely believing he was saving a soul from eternal torment, offered to end her earthly suffering. His compassion was the highest form of manipulation. Transcripts show that victims often thanked their tormentors after confessing. They were not choosing guilt, they were choosing an end to unbearable pain. The probability of survival was less than 1%, but the probability of stopping the torture was nearly 100%. But a personal confession was merely fuel. The system needed more names. This trap is timeless. A parent asks a child, "Are you going to clean up your toys now or after dinner?" The question of whether to clean them up at all is off the table. This is the narrowing of all possibilities down to two options that benefit the manipulator. It creates the illusion of control, though no real choice exists. Buy our phone or remain a technological outsider. Vote for our party or the country will face chaos. But the Inquisitors raised the stakes to the absolute limit. Their dilemma was existential, a choice between an earthly hell and an eternal one. It's like holding your breath. You are offered not a choice between breathing and not breathing, but between taking a small breath now or not breathing at all. Have you ever been offered a choice where both options were bad for you? The highest form of violence is not a scream. It is a quiet, sympathetic voice offering a way out. The transcripts conceal this scene. The Inquisitor, seeing the broken victim, would speak to her not in the language of threats, but with paternal care. He would call her "my daughter," lament her lost soul, and offer to help her save herself and return to the fold of the Church. And it was at this moment of mercy that he would describe in vivid detail the tortures that awaited her if she refused. This contrast between a caring tone and horrifying content shattered the will completely. The Inquisitor Bernard Gui advised, "One must speak to her gently, perhaps even touch her shoulder to show sympathy, while the executioner behind her prepares the instruments." He spoke like a savior, but acted like a hangman. What happens after the victim signs a confession? It seems her story is over. But this was not the end. It was the point of no return. A confession transformed the victim from the accused into a resource. The Inquisitor needed new names. Immediately after the signature, the next interrogation began. Name your accomplices. Refusal meant a return to torture. A broken person, having already chosen the path of least resistance, was forced to incriminate others. In the mass trials at Fulda, one man, Balthazar Nuss, triggered a chain reaction under torture that led to the execution of over 250 people, including himself. She named her neighbors and friends. The conveyor belt was now in motion. What happened next, we will see in the culmination of our investigation. It is here we find the answer to our second question. How were over 80% of sentences passed with a complete lack of evidence? The answer is simple and monstrous. Evidence wasn't sought, it was created. This was the fifth tool, the chorus of accusers. Another, already convicted witch would be brought into the tormented victim's cell to identify her as an accomplice. At first glance, this resembles a police lineup, a form of witness testimony, but the numbers destroy this illusion. This was not a search for truth, but a process of self-replication. Every convicted person, in order to stop their torture, was required to name new names. The 80% conviction rate is not an indicator of investigative efficiency. It is an indicator of the conveyor belt's productivity. The system operated not like a court, but like a forest fire. One spark, one broken victim, would ignite 2 or 3 others. Her denunciation was the fuel that allowed the fire to spread. Betrayal by a neighbor or friend destroyed the victim's social world. But this was merely a prelude to the final act, the transformation of this absurdity into a sacred ritual. In 1692, in the village of Salem, this mechanism operated with perfect precision. It all began when 9-year-old Betty Paris and her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, started suffering from fits. The initial accusations fell on 3 marginalized women. But the girls, empowered by the attention they received, set off a chain reaction. Each new confession, extracted under pressure, legitimized the previous ones. The horror grew until it began to consume respected members of the community. The trials only stopped when the governor's own wife was accused. This proves that the real evil in Salem was not the devil. It was the uncontrollable social virus of denunciation. And this virus has not disappeared. It now has a modern scientific name. Moral panic. In the 20th century, sociologists gave a name to this timeless mechanism. First, the media or another authority figure creates an image of an enemy. Society is thrown into a panic. The authorities respond with disproportionate measures. The psychological structure of this process is identical to that of Salem. An incident, amplification by authorities, a search for new culprits, and pressure on dissenters. This is not a problem of media literacy. It is a fundamental vulnerability of social psychology. And today, thanks to social media, this fire spreads not in months, but in minutes. An accusation that took a week to engulf a village in Salem can now reach 1 million people in 60 minutes via a viral tweet. The pyres have become digital, but they burn reputations with the same efficiency. By this point, the system had stripped the victim of 3 pillars: faith in herself, faith in others, and faith in reality. She appears to be completely destroyed. Her world is shattered and resistance is futile. But for the Inquisition, this was not enough. A simple confession extracted in a basement held no power. They needed a spectacle that would prove not the guilt of one person, but the omnipotence of the system itself. The culmination of this personal annihilation was not self-incrimination. It was the victim's voluntary participation in the ritual of her own condemnation. Social reality was dismantled, trust was destroyed. Now the system was ready to deliver the final blow, one that would elevate this machine of horror to the rank of divine justice. For this, it needed a theater. This was the 6th and final tool, the ritualization of the process. Why would an inquisitor whose goal is a confession need expensive robes, sacred texts in Latin, and a public stage? It seems inefficient, but the ritual created a sacred space where ordinary rules did not apply. An inquisitor in robes was no longer an investigator but a conduit of God's will. Resisting him became blasphemy. But the ritual was not just for the victim, it was for the inquisitor himself. It was a mechanism for absolving personal responsibility. He was not a torturer, but a surgeon of the soul, following a sacred protocol. This allowed educated men to commit monstrous acts without seeing themselves as monsters. The victim understood. Her enemy was not a person who could be moved by pity. Her enemy was an impersonal, divine machine. The last glimmer of hope died. This mechanism is timeless. In our pragmatic age, why do judges wear robes and corporations maintain complex bureaucracies? The superficial answer is that it's tradition creating an atmosphere of seriousness. But the psychological function is the same as it was for the Inquisition. Formalism depersonalizes the decision. A judge doesn't say, "I have decided to imprison you." He says, "The law sentences you." A manager doesn't say, "I'm firing you." He says, "Your position has been eliminated." Ritual allows a person to distance themselves from the consequences of their actions, shifting responsibility to an impersonal system. It acts as a sieve for moral guilt. The decision is filtered through protocol, and what emerges is an impersonal verdict. Ritual compels compliance by suppressing individual dissent. The verdict was known in advance, so why was a public trial necessary? The superficial answer is for deterrence, but the true goal was not to frighten, but to involve. A public trial was a collective ritual of purification. The crowd, shouting curses, became a co-participant in the verdict, affirming the legitimacy of the authorities and relieving them of some of the responsibility. During the auto da fe, not only were the charges read aloud, but also the victim's repentances. This transformed the victim from an object of violence into an active participant in a spectacle, one who herself confirmed the justice of the system. The condemned were forced to wear the San Benito, a yellow penitential garment painted with demons. Spectators could not only hear the sentence, but also see the sin drawn on the victim's body. 6 steps created the perfect machine for annihilating a personality. Its power lay not in superstition, but in its systematic nature. The first step, isolation, detached the victim from reality. The second, logical traps, paralyzed the mind. The third, gaslighting, replaced memory. The fourth, the false dilemma, paralyzed the will. The fifth, the chorus of accusers, destroyed social bonds. And the sixth, ritual, legitimized the new, insane reality. This technology does not require illiteracy to function. It targets the fundamental vulnerabilities of the human psyche. The blueprints for this machine were never lost. In 30 seconds, we will show how these 6 steps are applied today in cult recruitment, abusive relationships, and corporate propaganda. The machine did not work in parts. Its power was in its synergy. The first step, isolation, did not simply weaken the victim. It created sterile, laboratory-like conditions for the third step. A brain deprived of sleep, time, and social mirrors loses trust in itself. And into this vacuum, the Inquisitor injected the poison of gaslighting. The mind, desperately searching for any structure, any truth, clung to the only reality it was offered. These two methods are not additive, they are multiplicative. Gaslighting a person in their normal life is hard work. Gaslighting an isolated mind is almost a law of physics. This is precisely how destructive cults operate. First, the adept is cut off from family and friends. Then, in the created void, their worldview is rewritten. We see how the system broke trust in reality. Now, let's see how it paralyzed the very ability to think. On top of this broken reality, a paralysis of logic was imposed. The loaded question, the second tool, cornered the mind. Any attempt at a rational defense only confirmed guilt. This is the state of learned helplessness. A person realizes their intellect is no longer a weapon but a trap. And at this moment of intellectual paralysis, the system shifted gears. It stopped speaking to reason and began speaking to instinct. The false dilemma took the stage: confession or torture. The question was no longer, are you guilty? It was, do you want the pain to stop? The logical traps were the artillery barrage that destroyed the defenses. The false dilemma was the final assault, striking at the basic desire to survive. This is the timeless tactic of aggressive sales. First, the customer is confused with complex pricing plans. Then, when their brain is overloaded, they are offered a simple and quick solution, one that always benefits the seller. Have you ever been offered a simple choice right after being completely confused? The person is broken from the inside. Now the system destroyed them from the outside. The fifth tool, the chorus of accusers, eliminated the last pillar of support, faith in other people. Betrayal by a neighbor or a friend erased the victim's social reality. And upon these ruins, the divine seal of ritual was placed. The sixth step transformed the imposed absurdity into an official, public truth sanctioned by God. To resist it meant to stand against all of society and the Creator himself. The system was total. It attacked on every level: the individual through isolation, the rational through traps, the emotional through dilemmas, the social through denunciation, and finally, the symbolic through ritual. This is the exact model of modern cancel culture. First, a chorus of anonymous accusers on social media destroys a reputation. Then, public condemnation, this digital ritual, turns the person into an outcast, legitimizing the persecution. At the end of this path, we stand before two faces of horror. On one side, the sincere, blind fanaticism of the Inquisitor. He believes he is saving a soul through pain. His cruelty is fervent, fueled by ideology. He looks you in the eye and sees an evil that must be burned out for your own good. On the other side, the cold, impersonal cynicism of the system itself. It is a bureaucratic machine that does not care if you are guilty or not. It needs confessions for its reports and names to continue the process. It does not look you in the eye. To it, you are just a statistic. Which is more terrifying? Write one word in the comments: fanaticism or system. Your answer will reveal which threat you consider to be the greatest today, because the hammer of witches was never destroyed. It was simply disassembled into its component parts.